For you, Dad, try something classy for once. The words landed with a sting, dressed up as generosity, but carrying the familiar bite of condescension. I looked at my son Brian standing in the doorway of my modest living room with a gleaming bottle of champagne in his hand. His smile was polished, his suit a little too sharp for this quiet house in Topeka, Kansas. He arrived late, as always, sweeping in as though his presence alone were the real gift. 68 years old today. I hadn't planned on anything grand, only a small gathering, some pie cooling on the counter, and a handful of neighbors stopping by to offer their kind wishes. Their gifts had been simple, heartfelt: homemade jam, a knitted scarf, cards with careful words. They felt like me. The champagne, with its golden foil and sleek label, felt like him. Distant, showy, almost mocking. I hadn't seen Brian much these past years. Time and choices had pulled us apart, widening the gap until the man before me felt like a stranger in my own bloodline. He stepped closer, pressing the cold bottle into my hand with a smirk, as if to say I'd never known sophistication until he arrived to deliver it. Behind him, Susan lingered quietly, her eyes flicking toward me, then to the bottle, then away again. She didn't say much, she never did in these family moments, but the unease in her expression betrayed more than words could. Emily, my granddaughter, bounded past her mother and clutched at my sleeve with the innocent impatience only children possess. "Grandpa, can I have some cake now?" she whispered loudly, her eyes wide and expectant. I told her gently, patting her small hand. Her voice was the only pure sound in the room, a reminder of what still tethered me to hope. I set the champagne down on the table beside the pie. Its glass caught the amber light of late afternoon, refracting it in sharp, dazzling flashes. The room around me smelled of coffee and baked apples, the muted hum of conversation weaving a backdrop for this silent duel between father and son. Brian straightened his jacket and let his gaze sweep across the modest room, as though cataloging everything it lacked. "Don't say I never brought you anything," he said finally, his tone light but his eyes gleaming with something harder. I forced a smile, thin and brittle. "Thank you, son," I replied, my voice steady even as a weight pressed against my chest. I'd learned long ago not to rise to his barbs. Silence often said more than argument ever could. Around us, neighbors clinked their cups, Susan shifted uncomfortably, and Emily tugged at her mother's arm. Yet all I could hear was the space between Brian and me, louder than any chatter. I remembered him as a boy, messy hair, scraped knees, laughter echoing through this very kitchen as he begged for another slice of pie. That boy had vanished, replaced by this man whose smile concealed ambition and whose words dripped with disdain. I never cared for champagne beer on a summer evening or a tall glass of sweet tea when the day grew heavy. That was enough for me. But champagne had always seemed like a performance, a drink for people more concerned with appearances than taste. Brian knew that too. Which made me wonder if the bottle was really meant as a gift or as a statement. Perpendicular to the center of the room, and placed the bottle firmly on the table right in front of me. The gesture was deliberate, commanding attention. The bottle gleamed under the light, its golden neck catching every eye. He looked at it with pride, as if he were presenting evidence in a case he had already won. His jaw tightened, and in that moment, ambition flared in his eyes like a spark catching dry wood. I let my fingers drift across the cool glass, tracing its surface slowly, watching my son more closely than the champagne itself. My hand trembled, not from age alone, but from something deeper. A recognition that beneath this ordinary moment something darker lurked. Henry watched in silence, his hand trembling slightly as he touched the bottle. I looked at the champagne bottle and then at the photo of my late wife. "Honey, I never liked this stuff." The room was hushed after company leaves, lamplight thinning across the carpet, the clock marking time like a distant metronome. Outside, Topeka's autumn wind worried the porch swing on its chains, a soft creak, a gentle hush, as if the night itself were breathing. I sat on the edge of the sofa with the bottle in my hands, the gold foil cool against my palms, the label throwing back the amber glow from the floor lamp. It had shone like this earlier too proud for my kitchen, too bright for the kind of birthday I keep. I set the bottle on the coffee table and reached for the picture frame. Her smile was the sort that made a room feel honest, nothing to prove, nothing to sell. There were birthdays when we cut pie with mismatched plates and drank tea that had steeped too long, and somehow it all tasted perfect. I could hear her now in that half-remembered voice. Be kind, Henry. Save your anger for the things that deserve it. What deserves it, I wondered. A gesture dressed as generosity. A son's barbed joke that stuck under the skin. The way he arrived late and lacquered, dropping the bottle like a verdict. There was care in the way he handled it, but not a son's kind of care. Something showier and colder. I held the frame to steady my thoughts and felt my thumb rub along the tiny nick in the wooden edge, the same nick from the day we moved in, long before Brian learned how to speak in polished little cuts. The house hummed its ordinary noises, pipes settling, the fridge doing its stubborn work. From the porch, the swing called me like it always did on nights when the air needed to pass through my lungs a different way. I took the bottle with me, switched off the lamp, and let the hallway light lead me out. The boards gave their familiar complaint under my feet, another language I still understood. Chul smelled of dry leaves and the faint iron of the cooling rail. The neighborhood had gone to bed. Even the dogs had given up their patrols. I sat and set the bottle upright between my shoes. In the stillness, I replayed the afternoon. Not the words so much as the angles of them. The way he stood, slightly turned so the label caught the window light. How he watched my face instead of the room. How Susan's eyes warned and then folded away. The gift wasn't about taste. It was about being seen. Or maybe about me being made small. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself it was only a bottle, that a son can stumble at love and still love. I told myself the kindest lies old men tell themselves when they want the nights to be easier. But the truth moved anyway, quiet, a tide beneath the floorboards. There was something wrong with how it had all landed. Not in the grand way of dramas, just the sideways wrong of a picture frame hung a few degrees off that makes you fix it without thinking. Bottle and brought the lip of the foil close to my nose. I didn't break the seal. I'm not careless, and I'm not curious enough to tempt fate. Still, there was the faintest whiff that didn't belong. A medicinal edge slipping past the sweetness, a sterile bitterness that rode under the sparkle the label promised. The hairs along my forearms stood up like a field in a sudden gust. Maybe it's nothing, I said to the dark. The swing rocked once and settled. But the body keeps better records than the mind. Mine remembered hospitals and beeping monitors and what it meant to trust what you can't see. I stood, carried the bottle back inside, and went to the hall closet. On the top shelf sat the old cedar box with the brass latch. The one that held marriage certificates and letters with creases soft as fabric. I opened it and breathed in the faint ghost of wood and time. My wife's photograph lay on top. I slid the bottle beside it as if asking the past to keep watch over the present, closed the lid, and set the box back where it lived, out of casual reach. In the living room again, I left the lights off and crossed to the window. The street wore its thin veil of sodium orange. A moth circled the porch light, patient and foolish. I pressed 2 fingers to the glass. Cold but not winter yet. There was still time to be careful. I sat with my hands steepled, listening to the house, to the breath moving in and out of me, to the small and faithful tick of the clock. I tried to summon a generous thought about my son and found instead a wall. Not anger, not yet. A wall is what you lean against when you're too tired to stand upright on your own. Memories came like careful visitors. Brian at 8, knees dirty, grinning, a loose tooth he wiggled proudly with his tongue. Brian at 16, quick with numbers, quicker with pride. Brian at 30, suit too new, voice too smooth. The line between then and now was not a straight one, but somewhere along it the ground changed under our feet, and I hadn't noticed until I was already on it. Therese rose, switched the lamp back on, and looked at the empty spot where the bottle had been, the ring of light it had borrowed from the room. I told myself that tomorrow I would return the favor, one way or another. The bottle would go back to him, or go elsewhere, but it would not stay here like a question I was afraid to ask. The house exhaled as the furnace clicked on. I spoke to the silence the way widowers do when they forget they are alone. I whispered, "Brian, how much have you changed?" "Well, Henry doesn't drink champagne, but I will." Harold's laugh rolled through the doorway like warm air after a cold snap. He stood on my porch with his cap tugged low and a paper bag tucked under one arm, the sort of man who never arrived empty-handed. Late afternoon light angled across the living room, catching dust like slow, friendly snow. A couple of neighbors still lingered with paper plates and small talk. Susan rinsed cups in the kitchen, listening more than speaking. I had taken the bottle out of the cedar box for this visit, the wood scent still clinging to my hands. It felt wrong to keep it locked up while Harold, steady, unpretentious Harold, was here. He was the kind of friend who could turn any room honest. I set the champagne on the table, as if laying down a card I wasn't sure I wanted to play. Harold's eyes lit. "Look at that shine," he said, reaching for the neck with a careful, appreciative grip. He glanced at me for permission. I nodded. "You know me," I said, soft. "It's never really been my drink." From the doorway to the hall, Brian had already appeared, as if the bottle had called him by name. He didn't announce himself. He leaned against the frame the way a man leans when he wants to pass for casual, but his posture was a little too precise, his attention a little too fixed. Susan glanced over her shoulder, saw him, and lowered her gaze to the sink. Tile Harold worked at the foil, peeling back the gold with the patience of a man who uses his hands for a living. The metal whispered as it came away. The wire cage turned with its small, bright clicks. He grinned. "Haven't done this in a while." The cork gave that restrained pop that always sounds like a secret deciding to speak. A lacy breath of vapor rose and vanished. Harold chuckled in satisfaction. "Hear that? Music." He reached for two slender flutes I'd set out more out of politeness than expectation. "Henry, we'll just wet our tongues. No one's writing the rules today." I watched Brian instead of the bottle. The room's sounds ran thin. The faucet, the low chat at the table, the far hum of a lawnmower down the block, until all I could hear was my son's breathing, too quiet and too fast. His jaw had tightened the way a door does when the house settles wrong. Harold tilted the bottle. Champagne ribboned into crystal, bright and eager, a column of waking stars. He kept his hands steady, no waste, no fuss. He lifted the glass, half smiling at me over the rim. "Here's to 68, Henry, and to that porch swing that still hasn't thrown you." I almost smiled back, almost. Something in my chest tugged hard in the opposite direction. The room seemed to shift by a degree, the way a picture goes crooked when someone brushes past. My fingers found the back of a chair, the wood cool under my palm. Brian moved, not a flinch, not a step, an eruption. He came off the doorframe in a straight line, hand out, eyes narrowed to the kind of focus I'd seen only a few times in my life, none of them domestic. "Wait," he said, too quickly, too loud for the size of the room. Let me see that." Harold blinked, surprised but not yet alarmed. "Easy, son, it's just or the bottle itself." Harold, reflexively protective, shifted his grip to keep from spilling. For a heartbeat, they were two men sharing a tool across a workbench. Then the angle went wrong. The bottle knocked the rim of the glass, the flute leapt from Harold's hand and shattered on the edge of the table. The sound was thin and final, like ice breaking in deep water. Champagne spilled in a wild arc, seeding the tablecloth with bright spreading stains. In the lamplight, the liquid took on a coppery cast as it sank into the fabric, too vivid, too alive, an image my mind misnamed on instinct and refused to rename right away. Susan said from the kitchen, just his name, but there was a plea in it. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He was staring at the bottle with a tight, proprietary horror, as if the glass had betrayed him. Neighbors fell silent. One of them coughed and then thought better of it. I felt the room gather itself, all the small currents of attention flowing toward the same center. I had the absurd thought that if I reached out, I could smooth the moment down like wrinkled cloth. Instead, I kept my hand where it was and let the scene write itself without me. Harold lowered what remained of his half-raised toast. The cheerful color had drained from his cheeks. He looked from the bottle to Brian's whitened knuckles to Brian's face, drawn, calculating, far from the casual grin he wore when he came to borrow a ladder. The air in the room changed temperature without actually cooling. "Hey," Harold said, voice still even but smaller than before. He set the empty stem down among the bright shards, slow and careful. He studied Brian the way a man studies a rattle in an engine he's heard before but hoped not to hear again. What's wrong with this bottle, Brian? People are only afraid when they have something to hide. The words left my lips in a whisper, meant only for me, but they sounded louder in the empty house. Night had folded itself over Topeka, the neighborhood reduced to silhouettes and muted lamps behind curtains. My own living room carried the stillness of a waiting room after hours. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the steady ticking of the wall clock, the creak of the porch swing whenever the wind moved just right. I sat alone, yet not at peace. The image of Brian lunging for the bottle replayed again and again, sharper than the broken glass Harold had swept into the trash. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed, reliving the moment. Brian's face had drained of color when Harold lifted that glass. Fear had cracked through his polished mask, raw and unguarded. I had seen that look before, not on him, but on men cornered by truths they couldn't outrun. Stabilized, the phone rang. "I almost drank it," Brian muttered, his words a rasp. "I told you it wasn't supposed to be like this." My grip on the receiver tightened. My heart hammered so hard I thought the line itself might pick it up. Before I could speak, a click cut the connection. Silence filled the room again, heavier now. I replaced the phone slowly, as though the weight of it could shatter the moment. My reflection in the window stared back at me, pale and drawn, the champagne bottle still resting where I had hidden it earlier. I thought of Harold's puzzled eyes, of the stain spreading across the tablecloth like an accusation. "Grandpa?" I startled. Emily stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Why was Dad so scared of champagne? Her question hung there, innocent and sharp as glass. I swallowed hard, bending to kiss her forehead. "Don't worry about that now. Back to bed, Emily." She nodded, trusting, and patted down the hall. I watched her disappear, then turned back to the shadowed room. My hand went to the cedar box where the champagne now rested beside my wife's photograph. I laid my palm flat on the lid, feeling the grain under my skin, the memory of her steady presence. The pieces no longer floated, they lined up. Brian's fear, his frantic lunge, the phone call, the child's question. We were no longer young men, but when he spoke, I felt the anchor of those years. His garage smelled of oil and dust. Its rafters hung with tools like relics. Light pooled from a single bulb overhead, swaying faintly, casting shadows across the concrete floor. I carried the champagne bottle in both hands, careful as though it were a newborn or a live grenade. The cedar box had kept it hidden long enough. Tonight, it needed another set of eyes. Gary wiped his palms on a rag, then motioned me to the workbench cluttered with wires, jars, and machines whose names I never cared to learn. "Set it here," he said. The bottle looked absurd among the grease stains, and his eyes narrowing in the way only someone who's seen more than his share of lies can manage. "You think your boy put something in it?" I let out a breath, the words reluctant but solid. "I don't think, Gary. I know. The way he reacted yesterday when Harold lifted a glass, he nearly tore it out of his hands. Later I heard him on the phone. He said he almost drank it." The rag in Gary's hand stilled. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he nodded once, slow. "All right, let's see what truth the bottle wants to tell. There's something here, some trace that doesn't belong in champagne. Could be cleaning solvent, could be worse. I can't say for sure without lab work." My shoulders sagged, though not with relief. Certainty was close, but not close enough. He set the vial down, folded his arms, and fixed me with that same look he used to give recruits who thought they could outpace reality. "Henry, listen to me. Don't go charging at Brian with this. Not yet. You'll only tip him off. If you're Gary placed a hand on my shoulder, the gesture firm, grounding. "You're not imagining this, Henry. But proving it, that's the part that'll matter." I closed my hand into a fist against my thigh, feeling the rough seam of my jeans press into my palm. I had walked this far into suspicion. I wasn't turning back now. Henry tightened his grip, thinking to himself, "I'll have to go further." Poor Henry, losing his mind at 68. The words floated over the hiss of the griddle. Soft. She heard it first, I think. The whisper at the counter, a woman leaning into her companion, with that careful, tragic tone, small towns reserved for misfortune. Susan's shoulders stiffened, then she stared harder at her cup, as if heat could hold her steady. The bell above the door announced me with a bright, unnecessary cheer. I nodded to faces I'd known for years. Some nodded back. Best for everyone rarely includes the one being decided about. Outside, a wind pushed dried leaves along the curb, a soft shuffling that sounded like someone leaving. The waitress topped off my coffee and didn't meet my eyes. Across the room, Mr. Talbot. I knew these lines. I'd heard them in hospital corridors and in family meetings where no one wanted to say who they were protecting from whom. At the window table, Susan's gaze finally lifted, skimming the diner until it found me. A quick flicker of relief. Behind us, silverware chimed. Someone laughed too loudly and then quieted. "Who else has he told?" I asked. "The pastor, I think, Mr. Talbot, Mrs. Keene at the post office. He says he's just preparing people, in case." "In case," I repeated, letting the words sit between us. I set my cup down with care so it wouldn't clatter and prove any point for him. Susan's voice softened. "Henry, he thinks he's helping." I met her eyes. "Does he?" She flinched, then reached for my hand and thought better of it. "I don't know. I don't know what he thinks anymore." Quiet long enough to hear the cook call an order up. The waitress slid a plate onto my table and I thanked her by name. She blinked, startled, then smiled like she was remembering something she'd been taught to forget. I turned to Susan, feeling the room tilt in that slow way a boat leans when the wind changes. "Do you think I'm crazy?" I asked. No gentler phrasing would do. If a lie was being built around me, I needed to know whether she was helping to carry the lumber. Her face folded in on itself. She stared down at the seam of the table where the vinyl met the wood. "I don't," she said finally, the words small but clear. "But it's getting hard to know what to say when he's convincing." Convincing. That was the word Brian had learned to wear like a second skin. I paid the check and stood. Susan rose with me, but we didn't hug. There are gulfs a simple gesture can't cross without breaking, and we had already broken enough plates for 1 week. Outside, the afternoon had gone pale and thin, the sky a sheet pulled tight over a body you don't want to look at too closely. Neighbors passed, their greetings airy, their eyes cautious. By the time I reached the truck, the quiet felt heavier than noise. I drove the long way home, past the park where Emily liked to run, past the church where I had carried my wife's photograph down the aisle one last time. Small places kept their promises. They remembered you. Today they remembered the wrong things. I parked at the curb and sat for a minute with the engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal. The champagne bottle waited where I'd left it, the cedar box holding its silence like a vow. I touched the key and felt the faint tremor in my hand. Anger, yes, but something colder braided through it, isolation. I went home with the heavy certainty that the whole neighborhood had turned its back. Finally, proof. The words slipped out before I could stop them, half prayer, half victory. Morning light was just beginning to thin the chill when I spotted it, tucked in the blue recycling bin beside Brian's driveway, half hidden under a layer of glossy mailers and a crumpled bakery box. A small white plastic vial, the pharmacy kind, no label, no cap. A dusting of pale residue clinging to the threads at the mouth. Not something you toss by mistake, not something you want found. I glanced up and down the street. Saturday quiet. Lawns silvered with dew. Somewhere a garage door complained its way open, then closed again. Susan's car sat in their drive. The curtains were drawn. I reached in and took the vial with 2 fingers, holding it away from me like a lit match. It was light, too light, yet it carried a weight I could feel in my wrist. Brian's mailbox creaked in the wind. I told myself I wasn't stealing. Trash at the curb belongs to no one. Besides, truth thrown away is still truth. I slipped the vial into my jacket pocket and walked on. Not too fast, not too slow. An old man taking his morning constitutional, with nothing more on his mind than the weather. At the corner, I crossed and headed home by the longer route, cutting behind the church and past the ball field where Emily once learned to chase pop flies and laughter at the same time. The vial tapped the lining of my pocket with each step, an impatient metronome. By the time my porch came into view, the sun had cleared the last fringe of oak and poured itself across the steps. I unlocked the door and went straight to the cedar box. The brass latch clicked, and the familiar breath of old wood rose to meet me. I laid the vial beside the champagne, then paused. The contrast was almost obscene. The bottle's gold neck and polished pride, the cheap white plastic with its chalky throat. Ugly and pretty. Cause and effect. I considered calling Gary right then, but the hour was early. I wanted photographs first, proof that would stand up if anyone tried to call me forgetful. I set the vial on a sheet of clean paper, wrote the date and time, and took pictures with the old digital camera that never trusted the cloud. The lens clicked like a small, loyal animal. Coffee, then. I needed. While the kettle grumbled, I stood at the window and watched a delivery van nose past. Then the neighbor boy coast by on a bicycle too small for him now. Normal life continued to argue its case. I poured, drank, and let the heat sand down the edge of my excitement until it was steady resolve. The plan was simple. Seal the vial in a bag, tape it under the cedar lid, lock the box, and call Gary. Tell him I had more than suspicion. Tell him we were past guesses and into the territory where facts keep their own company. I would go further, like I'd promised myself, but not with noise, with care. I bagged the vial, wrote my initials over the tape, and slid it into the box beside the champagne. The house made its small morning sounds, the furnace exhaling, the fridge cycling, the faint tick of the kitchen clock gaining confidence. I closed the lid, set the box back on its shelf, and as always, tested the front door deadbolt twice. Habit, not fear. Not yet. Take had been short the night before, and the chair by the window invited me the way it always does when I need 10 quiet minutes to let the heart stop rowing so hard. I meant to sit. Instead, I woke in the same chair 90 minutes later, with the mug cool in my hand and a line of sunlight crawling across the rug toward my shoes. A man my age should scold himself for dozing without meaning to. I didn't. I was too grateful for the way the body sometimes offers mercy unasked. I rose, stretched the stiffness out of my back, and went to the hall closet to check the box again, because proof makes its own kind of hunger, and you want to touch it to be sure it's still there. The shelf was where it always is. The brass latch shone its small, familiar shine. I opened the lid. In its cradle. The sheet of paper lay where I'd placed it. The clear zip bag sat in the center, flat, empty. For a long breath, my eyes refused the fact of what they were seeing. I lifted the bag, nothing but the ghost of where the vial had lain. I pawed through the contents, gentleness gone, pulled the bottle aside, shuffled the papers, felt under the seam of the lining, then on the floor around my shoes. Nothing. I checked the shelf, the closet floor, the top of the washer beside it. Nothing. Room to room, as if I might have set it down somewhere during that unplanned nap and simply forgotten, under the lamp, beside the phone, on the kitchen counter near the kettle. Nothing. In the trash beneath the sink, coffee grounds, onion skins, a folded paper towel with the outline of a ring where a mug had sat. Nothing. Stabilized. This time I took the box down and turned it out on the kitchen table. A thin cardboard carton slid free. A small white generic box with a perforated top already torn. The kind that once would have wrapped a vial exactly like the one I'd found. No label. A faint chemical tang clung to the crease. I opened it. Empty. My palms prickled. I looked at the door. Deadbolt still set. Chain still down. In the living room, the curtain lifted and fell, though the window was latched. I listened harder. To the house. To what the house wasn't saying. I checked the back door. No scuff on the frame, no mud on the mat. The kitchen window latch sat true. I told myself I was being ridiculous, misplacing things, proving his rumor for him. Then I remembered the neatness of the empty bag. Its seal smoothed with care, not ripped. Someone had opened the box and put everything back as if to say, "We were here and you were sleeping." Anger rose like a fever, and under it, a colder thing I did not want to name. I put the champagne back in the cedar box, locked it, and carried it to the bedroom closet instead, tucked behind winter coats that still smelled faintly of last year's snow. Then I stood at the window with the phone in my hand, thumb over Gary's number, and didn't dial. Not yet, because I wanted eyes on the street first. Across the yard, the oak's shadow lay long and clean on the grass. A car I didn't recognize rolled past, slow just long enough to swallow the mailbox numbers with its tinted windows. It didn't stop. I almost let my breath go. That's when I saw it at the hedge line. Movement so slight I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for a reason to believe in ghosts. A shape, more suggestion than man, held just outside the spill of sun. A shoulder maybe. The hinge of a jaw. A hat brim that withdrew as soon as I saw it. I stepped closer to the glass, the phone now cold against my ear, even before I pressed call. The shape didn't come forward. It didn't run. It hovered at the edge of my yard like a decision not yet made, then slipped away along the fence, keeping to the shade. Let's see who pays me a visit tonight. Restarted it to the dark like a man setting his own watch. The house answered with its small, reliable murmurs. The furnace turning over, the clock ticking down the hall, the porch swing creaking once as the wind sifted through. I laid the spool on the entry table, tore off a length of fine cotton, and knelt at the threshold. Old bones protested, but habit steadied my hands. I stretched the thread across the inside base of the front door, anchored each end with a sliver of clear tape, and tightened it until it trembled. Too thin to notice in the dim, just enough that a careless toe or a key turned by a stranger would snap it clean. One more measure. In the hallway, where the wood meets the rug, I shook a light breath of talcum from an old travel tin, barely a veil, enough to take a print from a shoe that doesn't belong. I set the tin where I'd find it in the morning, not where an intruder might. The cedar box, with the champagne, had already been moved to a different closet, behind coats that still held winter's ghost. The spot in the hall where it used to sit remained conspicuously empty. Let him look for the absence. Let the absence look back. I killed the lamps, leaving only the small nightlight in the kitchen to show the edges of furniture. The phone went beside the chair with Detective Reyes's card tucked under it, face up like a promise. I poured water, took 2 slow sips, and made a circuit of the windows, latches, set. Shades drawn, leaving a finger of space at the sides, enough for me to see. This was not paranoia. This was a carpenter's care. Measure twice, cut once. I stretched out on the couch, boots off, jacket on. The cushions carried the day's faint warmth. The silence carried yesterday's questions. I closed my eyes and breathed like a man going to sleep. I did not sleep. Not at first. The body has its own clocks, though, and somewhere after midnight, the steady tick of mine loosened my hold on wakefulness. What woke me wasn't a sound, but a change in the quality of the quiet. The way air feels different when a door has been opened and closed again. I lifted my head into the dark and listened hard enough to hear the house remember me. A long minute, then another. No voices, no car, just that altered stillness, like a pond smoothing after a stone. I sat up without turning on a light and let my eyes settle to the gray. The window showed a faint smear of the street lamp on the lawn. The kitchen nightlight made a thin triangle on the floor. I stood and moved, the way a man moves on a creaking dock, weight on the edges, heel to toe. At the hallway's mouth, I stopped. Even in the near dark, I knew what I was looking at. The talc was scuffed in a shallow arc. One print, then a smear, then a second, lighter, as if the owner realized too late he'd left a trail and tried to erase it with the side of his shoe. I swallowed once, slow. The front door was a shadow at the end of the hall. I went to it and crouched. The thread lay slack on the floor in 2 pale strands, ends curled where the tape had given. Not torn by accident, cleanly severed. Whoever had come in knew enough to open quiet, to step light, and still, the house had told on him. I straightened and let the anger rise, measured and cold. It didn't flare this time, it focused. I could almost feel the path he'd taken. A pause at the entry, a glance toward the living room, a step to the hall closet that used to hold the cedar box, the slight drag of a hand along the wall. I pictured the door eased open on an empty shelf, a heartbeat of hesitation, then the small, frustrated shift of weight, prints right where the talc lay. He'd come for the bottle. He didn't find it. He'd left with his certainty shaken, but not broken. I forced myself to take inventory, not comfort. The living room drawers sat as I'd left them. The lamp's pull chain lay straight, not swinging. On the entry table, my keys were an even fan, not disturbed. In the kitchen, one chair had moved a finger's width. Nothing else hinted at clumsy hands. This was someone who knew how to pass through a house like weather. That knowledge chilled me more than if he'd overturned a room. Tightened to the bedroom and opened the closet where the box now lived. The coats hung as they had, sleeves blunt, shoulders square. Behind them, the cedar's brass latch glinted like a small, defiant eye. I touched it, not to open, only to feel the cool of it in my palm. Still there, still sealed. Back in the hall, I stared at the broken thread. A simple line, cut clean, becomes a sentence. My jaw ached where I'd been clenching it without noticing. I closed my eyes and saw frames of the last week. The bottle catching the afternoon light, Harold's glass exploding like thin ice, Brian's face when the cork had sighed, the phone call that wasn't meant for me. Tonight's trespass stitched them to a single cloth. In the front room, I eased into the chair by the window and let my breath even out. Outside, the street wore an empty expression. A shape might have been a tree or a man. The longer you looked, the more your mind tried to make one into the other. A car drifted past without headlights and coasted to the corner before starting up again. I memorized the sound of its engine the way you memorize a lie you know you'll have to answer. I lifted the phone, thumbed Reyes's number, then stopped. Calling now would bring lights and questions and polite, skeptical eyes on a floor dusted with powder and a thread in two pieces. I would call in the morning when photographs were clean and words weren't trembling from lack of sleep. Not because I doubted myself, because I wanted every step to hold. The clock on the wall clicked past 2. I let the minutes settle into me the way silt settles after a flood. The house calmed. The air returned to its ordinary temperature. In that quiet, the decision I'd been circling finally put its name on the table. I wasn't mistaking shadows for men. Someone had been here. Someone wanted the champagne, or the absence of it, more than he wanted me to sleep. I sat up, swung my feet to the floor, and exhaled the kind of breath that starts a new day, even in the middle of the night. Brian. Have you come to this? He was supposed to drink it, not Harold. The voice came from the tiny recorder on my coffee table. Brian's voice flat and tight as a wire. I had set the device there at dusk, its red light steady, a poor man's insurance policy. After the broken thread beneath the door and the dusty half-prints on the hall floor, I no longer trusted the quiet to stay honest. I swapped the old kitchen radio for the palm-sized recorder and kept the landline on speaker, volume low, ready to catch whatever the night decided to say out loud. It didn't take long. The phone rang once, then again. I let it go, then tapped speaker and pressed record. A breath, a sleeve brushing a mic, the scrape of a car seat, or maybe a jacket zipper. Then Brian not speaking to me, speaking past me, to someone riding shotgun, or on another line he thought was the only one listening. He was supposed to drink it, he said, each word careful as if he might chip a tooth on it. Not Harold. Something, maybe a reply, blurred in the background. I couldn't make out the words, only the shape of agreement. Brian's breath flared closer to the phone. It got messy. He gave it away. Don't lecture me. I know what I'm doing. A pause. No, it's handled. The line clicked. Silence rushed in. The red light kept burning. I didn't move at first. The house felt smaller, like the walls had stepped in to hear better. I stopped the recorder with my thumb and started it again, rewinding until the tape's numbers fell back to the beginning of his sentence. When the words played the second time, they landed the way a nail does when the hammer finally finds the head. Not a hint, not an inference, an admission, dressed in daylight. I took the recorder in both hands, as if warmth from my palms could keep the truth from cooling. My mouth had gone dry. I turned the volume up a notch and walked to the window, watching the street hold its breath under a wash of weak moonlight. Somewhere a late shift car eased by, tires whispering. The porch swing didn't move. The front door opened without a knock. I tensed and turned, then let my shoulders drop. Susan stood there with a casserole pan wrapped in a towel, apology written across her face. I knocked, she said, soft. Maybe you didn't hear. Her eyes fell to the recorder in my hands. Is that? I pressed play. Brian's voice filled the room again, smaller now, tinny. He was supposed to drink it, not Harold. Susan flinched like the air had startled her. She set the pan on the entry table without looking where it landed. "Henry?" she whispered, as if the walls might repeat anything spoken too loudly. "What is he doing? Who is he talking to?" "I don't know yet," I said. My hands shook just enough that I set the device back down before I dropped it. "But whatever this is, it isn't an accident." She reached for the back of a chair and held it like a rail on a moving bus. For a second, her face looked so young I almost called her by the wrong name, my wife's name. Then the moment passed. "You have to take that to someone," she said. "Tonight." Unwilling. "I will," I told her. "First thing in the morning, chain of custody, paper, signatures." I wanted to stand up when he tries to knock it down. The words steadied me as I said them. Planning is a kind of breathing.
"Emily's asleep at my sister's."
Susan added, almost to herself, as if that single point of safety might balance the rest. I didn't want her here tonight. We stood with a recorder between us like a small, humming witness. I played the clip once more, not because I needed to hear it again, but because the act of playing it was a promise to myself. I would not let this be a story told only in my head. Evidence is a bridge you build because you know the water will rise. "Henry," Susan said, "I'm so sorry." "You didn't pour anything into that bottle," I said, "and neither did Harold." I reached for the towel on the casserole. "We'll eat this cold tomorrow and call it a celebration." "For what?" she asked, helpless and hopeful at the same time. "For the truth," I said, "for it finally speaking loud enough." She nodded and wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand. "I'll go. Lock your doors. Don't answer if he comes." "I won't," I told her, and I meant it. She left the way she'd come, quiet, turning the knob without a sound. The latch clicked, a small, faithful sound. Alone again, I set the recorder on the table and wrote the time on an index card in block letters I could read in the morning without wondering if my hand had lied. Then I played the sentence one last time. My heart thudded, deliberate and unafraid. The tremor in my fingers wasn't fear anymore. It was momentum. Project us in a narrow office, a detective with clean questions and a patient pen. I pictured the cedar box in the closet, the unlabeled carton I'd found after the vial vanished, the snap thread on the floor. Pieces were beginning to belong to each other. Wilmington each for the lamp chain and stopped. From the porch came a sound like a fist deciding what kind of night it wanted to be. One knock, then three in a row, then a hard, hurried rattling that set the door in its frame. A frantic pounding at the door. Someone had come at midnight. "Walker, let's start with the champagne." The words came evenly, spoken across a metal table that had been cleaned so many times it shone like a mirror under fluorescent light. The interrogation room at the Topeka precinct was smaller than I expected. 4 walls the color of wet paper, a clock that ticked too loudly, and a camera in the corner that blinked every few seconds. Detective Laura Reyes sat across from me, a yellow legal pad in front of her, pen already uncapped. Her posture was upright, her expression both careful and blunt, as though she'd weighed 100 stories like mine and knew most of them bent somewhere under scrutiny. I slid the cedar box forward. Its brass latch clinked faintly. She glanced at it once, then back at me, waiting. I opened it slowly and laid the champagne bottle on the table. The golden foil gleamed too brightly under the institutional light. Beside it, I placed the small recorder, its screen scratched from years of pocket wear. "I'm not here to waste your time," I said, "but you need to hear this." She pressed the recorder's play button. Brian's voice filled the room, flat and unmistakable. He was supposed to drink it, not Harold. Reyes didn't flinch. She let it play twice, 3 times, the sound tinny in the silence. Then she stopped it and wrote something on her pad. "This was recorded where?" "In my living room. I've had reasons to start keeping track." She studied me. "And this bottle, this is the one your son gave you for your birthday?" I nodded. "I never touched it, haven't opened it. I don't drink this stuff. But someone wanted me to." Her hand hovered over the glass neck, then pulled back. She motioned to the officer outside the door, who stepped in with a cardboard evidence sleeve and latex gloves. She didn't touch the bottle herself. She only watched as the officer slipped it into the sleeve, labeled it, sealed it with tape. "Chain of custody," she said aloud, mostly for the record. The room's air felt heavier now, as if the bottle had changed state from object to charge. "Mr. Walker," Reyes said, leaning forward, her tone clipped. "If what you're telling me is true, if this recording holds up and the toxicology confirms what you suspect, this isn't negligence. This isn't some family squabble. This is attempted murder." The words landed with a clean finality, sharper than any I'd allowed myself to form. Attempted murder. Not suspicion, not paranoia. A crime with a name that fit. I exhaled slowly, feeling my pulse in my wrists. "Then you understand why I couldn't just let it sit in my closet anymore?" She closed her pad. "We'll expedite the analysis. I'll call you as soon as we have results. Until then, stay alert. Don't confront him directly. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. But my mind already lingered on the thought of Brian hearing the word murder in a room like this. How he would react, what he would try next. The interview ended with the shuffle of papers and the snap of gloves. The officer carried the champagne out like a relic, the recorder sealed in a separate envelope. Reyes offered me her hand across the table. Her grip was firm. "We'll be in touch." I left the station with the weight of the evening pressing between my shoulder blades. The night outside was cooler than I remembered, the air damp with the promise of rain. Cars rolled by, headlights flashing across the pavement in restless arcs. I stepped down to the lot, keys in hand, ready to slide into the old truck and drive home to a house that suddenly felt more like evidence than refuge. That was when I saw him, leaning against the far end of the lot, half in shadow, half in the sodium light from the street lamp. Brian. There folded, his arms waitable at first. Then, as he caught sight of me, his eyes sharpened, hard and narrow, like glass ground to an edge. He didn't move toward me. He only stood there, still as a warning, gaze locked on mine, and let the silence carry all the things he didn't say. "No one will believe you, old man." Brian's whisper was cold against the late afternoon air, the kind of voice you don't mistake for concern. He stood in my yard with his hands in his pockets, posture loose but charged like a wire. The sun had dropped low, cutting long shadows across the grass, the quiet of the neighborhood pressing in like a held breath. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched the way he shifted his weight, the restless motion of a man trying to cage his own anger. For years, he'd worn the mask of a dutiful son, smiling just enough, speaking warmly in public. Now the mask had slipped, and there was no trace of it left. "You think they'll believe some tape? A bottle you never even opened?" he said, his tone sharper now. "You've been forgetting things, haven't you? Everyone's already talking. They'll think you imagined it," he smirked. "The whole town will think you're losing it." I met his gaze without blinking. My voice stayed even. "The truth doesn't need believers, Brian. It stands whether anyone looks at it or not." His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, the edge of his shoe grinding against the gravel. "You don't know who you're fighting. I've already made sure the story is out there. You—" His hand sliced the air, cutting off his own sentence. "You're finished." I turned slightly, giving myself space between us, my palm brushing the porch rail. "I raised you to know better than this. Somewhere along the line, you decided ambition mattered more than blood. That choice was yours." His face hardened. He slapped his hand against the porch table, the sound cracking the stillness like a gunshot. A glass of water toppled, hit the wood, and shattered on the steps below. Shards glittered across the ground, water darkening the planks as if blood had seeped there. Brian's breathing was ragged, his chest rising and falling too fast. He stared at me, eyes burning, waiting for me to recoil. I didn't move. Then a flicker caught my eye. Behind the curtain of the front window, Emily's small face pressed to the glass, her wide eyes frozen on us. She had seen the whole thing. Her innocence hung there like a mirror neither of us wanted to look into. Henry, I think I know what Brian did. Her voice trembled across the small table between us. The cafe was nearly empty, just the low hum of an espresso machine and a ceiling fan turning slow circles overhead. Outside, the late afternoon light glazed the windows, but inside it felt dim, private, like a room built for secrets. I studied her face. Susan's hands were locked around her cup, knuckles pale, steam curling up and disappearing before it reached her eyes. She wouldn't look at me at first. "What do you mean?" I asked, steady but gentle. She swallowed hard. "I saw him a few days before your birthday. He had a vial in his hand, small, white, no label. I asked about it, and he said it was nothing. But then I heard him on the phone later. He said you'd never see it coming. He was angry, Henry, desperate. I didn't want to believe it." The weight of her words settled in me like lead. Proof had been circling me, fragments aligning, and now one more piece fell into place. "You've been carrying this alone," I said softly. Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head. "I wanted to tell you earlier, but he's my husband. And Emily, she doesn't deserve any of this. I'm torn in half, between protecting him, protecting her, and doing what's right." I reached across the table, laying my hand near hers without forcing the touch. "Susan, the truth doesn't disappear just because we hide from it. And the truth, when spoken, protects more than silence ever can. Even you." Her shoulders broke under the weight she'd been holding. She pressed both hands to her face and sobbed quietly, the sound small but piercing in the hush of the cafe. I waited, not rushing her grief, letting her find the shape of her own courage. At last, she looked up, eyes red, jaw trembling but set. "If they ask me, if it comes to it, I'll testify. I'll say what I saw. I can't live with myself if I don't." I nodded, my chest tight with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. "That will mean everything. Not just for me, but for Emily. She deserves a mother who chooses truth." Susan's breath steadied, and for the first time since I'd sat down, I saw resolve flicker in her expression. A fragile flame, but enough. The bell over the cafe door jingled. Both of us turned. Brian stood there, framed by the doorway, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on us. The moment his gaze locked, something sharp and knowing flashed across his face. Anger braided with suspicion. He had seen us together, and he understood. Henry tried to kill himself with champagne. The rumor spread through town offices like ink in water. By the time I arrived at the municipal building to pay my property tax, I could feel it hanging in the air, passed along in half whispers at desks, hidden behind sympathetic smiles that didn't reach the eyes. I didn't need to ask where it started. Brian stood at the clerk's counter, posture polished, voice pitched just right for pity. "My father's been depressed," he said, loud enough for anyone nearby to overhear. "We found a note. We found the bottle. Thank God I got to him in time." He shook his head with a sigh rehearsed to the last breath. "He's not safe on his own anymore." Susan lingered a step behind, her hands clasped tight, eyes fixed on the floor. Emily sat on a bench near the wall, swinging her feet unnoticed, but listening harder than anyone realized. The clerk frowned and slid papers across the counter. "And these documents?" "Updated provisions," Brian said smoothly, producing an old will I hadn't seen in years, one that left the house in his name, for safekeeping. "It's time to make it official. Dad isn't in a state to manage property anymore." Scrape landed like a gavel. I stepped forward. "That will is outdated. You know it." Brian turned, surprise flashing across his face before it hardened into something colder. "Dad, please, don't embarrass yourself. Everyone knows what happened. Why not save us all the trouble and sign?" For a heartbeat, silence stretched, all eyes fixed on me. Then from the bench, Emily's small voice cut through the air. "Grandpa didn't drink it." "I heard you, Dad. You said he was supposed to." On the mask cracking, but Emily shrank back against the wall, her innocence unshaken by his glare. Susan's breath caught, and she finally lifted her eyes, wet, torn, but no longer blind. I squared my shoulders. "You can spread all the rumors you want, son. You can wave old papers around. But if you want to take what's mine, you'll have to do it the right way." I let the weight of each word settle. "I'll see you in court." His smile twitched, but no words followed. He gathered the documents with a snap and turned sharply away. As I stepped out of the building, the afternoon light hit me square, harsher than usual. Detective Reyes was waiting by the steps, her badge at her hip, her expression grave. She lowered her voice as she passed me a folded slip of paper. "Be careful, Mr. Walker," she said. "He's desperate now. Case number 1438, State of Kansas versus Brian Walker." The bailiff's voice echoed through the packed courtroom, bouncing off the paneled walls and drawing a hush from the crowd. Wooden benches were filled, shoulder to shoulder, neighbors, shopkeepers, even faces I hadn't seen in years. They were here for the spectacle, but also, I hoped, to see truth uncovered. Brian sat at the petitioner's table, posture crisp, suit immaculate, his expression polished into an imitation of concern. Beside him, his attorney arranged papers with the calm confidence of someone who had rehearsed this narrative a dozen times. The dutiful son, the failing father. Across the aisle, I sat with Detective Reyes at my shoulder, her presence an anchor. In front of me rested the cedar box, brass latch gleaming faintly in the overhead light. My hands folded atop it, not for protection, but for strength. Inside, the recorder, the bottle's documentation, and a photograph of my late wife. The one piece of honesty that had guided me through all of this. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Brian Walker, you may proceed." Wildfires rose smoothly, voice pitched to draw sympathy. "Your Honor, my father is not well. He's been confused, erratic. We found evidence that he attempted to harm himself, using champagne of all things. It is painful to say, but he's no longer capable of caring for himself or his property." His words hung like a fog, heavy and rehearsed. Murmurs rippled through the benches. I saw Harold and Margaret shift uncomfortably, exchanging a glance that carried memory of the day the glass shattered. Emily, small among the crowd, leaned forward, her eyes fixed on me, steady as if she were lending her courage. When my turn came, I stood slowly, letting the scrape of the chair legs mark the moment. I placed the cedar box on the witness stand, opened it with deliberate care, and held up the recorder. "This is my son's voice," I said, pressing play. Brian's admission spilled into the room. "He was supposed to drink it, not Harold." Defendant froze, not a cough, not a shuffle, even the judge's pen stopped mid-note. I set the recorder down and lifted the framed photograph of my wife, showing it only to steady myself. "She taught me that truth has a sound. You've just heard it. And I am asking this court not to mistake age for madness." At the table beside Brian, Susan's hands trembled. Her eyes darted between the judge, Brian, and me. Her lips pressed tight as though holding back years of silence. Sweat beaded at her temple. Her shoulders shook. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Walker," she said, her tone measured but sharp, "what do you have to say?" The room turned toward her. A silence deeper than before pressed down, waiting. "The champagne contained poison." The words came from the forensic expert, delivered flat and without embellishment, but they cracked across the courtroom like a hammer. A hush rolled through the benches. Even the judge leaned forward, pen stilled midair. The expert continued, explaining the compound detected, the lethal concentration, the certainty that it had been deliberately introduced. Detective Reyes stepped forward, producing the evidence log. "Your Honor, the bottle was in Mr. Henry Walker's possession, sealed, until it was submitted through official chain of custody. There is no doubt where it originated." Then the recording played again. Brian's voice, unmistakable and thin through the speakers. He was supposed to drink it, not Harold. The silence that followed was complete. The jury sat rigid. The townspeople on the benches looked not at me but at Brian, as though the shape of him had changed before their eyes. Susan rose slowly, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "I saw him with the vial. I heard him speak about it. I should have spoken sooner, but I am speaking now." She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, meeting the judge head-on. "He planned this." Aside of the benches, Harold stood as well, his frame still broad with the strength of work. "That glass was in my hand. If Henry hadn't passed it to me, it would have been him." His words cut through the air like iron. Brian's mask fractured. His chair screeched as he shoved it back, rising with sudden fury. "It wasn't for him," he shouted, pointing across the room at me. his voice cracking. It was for Dad. For him, not Harold. The confession hung raw, unplanned, bleeding truth. Susan covered her face with her hands. Emily clutched Margaret's arm. The judge banged the gavel once, sharp. Two uniformed officers moved quickly. Brian resisted, jerking his arms, voice splintering into curses. But they pressed him down, the metallic snap of handcuffs echoing louder than his protests. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body felt rooted to the wood of the bench, my eyes fixed on the boy I once held, now dragged down by his own choices. The crowd murmured, disbelief and pity tangled together. When it was over, and the courtroom began to breathe again, I stayed seated. My hand went to the photograph of my wife, worn smooth from years of touch. I held it tight, my eyes damp, the weight of truth, both victory and burden.
"Grandpa, are you okay?" Her voice was the lightest tap on the door of a tired room. I looked over and found Emily on the porch swing beside me, sneakers tucked beneath her, the slats creaking to our slow rhythm. Late sun angled through the maples, laying out long gold planks across the yard. The courthouse dust was still on my cuffs. The gavel's echo hadn't quite left my ears. "I'm here," I said. "That's a start." We rocked in silence a while. From the kitchen, ice settled in a pitcher. From the street, a neighbor I barely knew lifted two fingers in a nod that carried something like respect. A week ago, I would have read it as pity, not today. Truth has a way of changing the tint of glass. Emily leaned her shoulder into my arm. "You told Mom, you told me, the truth would protect us." She studied my face. "It did, didn't it?" I said. "And it will, if we keep it close." On the porch table lay a manila folder with a lawyer's business card clipped to it. This afternoon, I'd signed what needed signing. Revocations, amendments, clean sentences for a mess that had nearly taken my voice. The house would not be bait again. A portion would pass to Emily in time, not as a prize for surviving, but as a promise that the ground under her feet belonged to steadier things than rumor. She noticed the folder and traced the edge of it with one finger. "Is that for me?" "Flushed. For you," I said, "and for who you'll become. Not today. One day." Her eyes shone in a way that had nothing to do with tears. The screen door eased open. Susan stepped out with Harold behind her, both of them in the hush that follows a storm. "We're going to take a walk," she said, wearing gratitude like a shawl. Harold lifted his hand. No speeches, just a look that said he was still here because we all refused to look away. Breathed. A bicycle bell rang. Someone's grill popped in the distance. The town, fussy and ordinary, had resumed its small noises, as if nothing earth-shaking had happened at all. Maybe that was mercy. Emily shifted again. "Will Dad?" I took a long breath. There are answers I don't have and a few I wish I didn't. What I do have is today, and you, and a swing that knows how to hold us up. Shuffled her little hand into my palm and squeezed. "I'll always believe you," she said, fierce in that quiet way children sometimes are. "I'll always believe you, Grandpa." Tightened the pitcher sweated on the table. I poured iced tea, the glass beating in the late heat, and lifted it to my lips. Across the street, another neighbor passed, met my eyes and nodded, not the way you nod to a rumor, but to a man returned to his own name. I tipped my head back, swallowed, and let the evening settle on my shoulders like a well-worn coat. I raised the glass toward the empty chair that used to hold my wife, toward the road that still waited to be walked, toward the girl beside me who would learn how to keep the record straight. I sipped once more, tasted everything we'd lost and what we'd managed to save, and whispered, "Some drinks are bitter by design." In the end, the courtroom stripped away every mask, and the quiet dignity of truth outlasted deceit. Betrayal had nearly silenced an old man, but courage and patience turned his scars into testimony, and justice stood where lies had tried to take root. Justice may arrive late, but when it comes, it strikes with the weight of inevitability. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you resonate with this story.